welcome back to Gardening Young. So today we are going to be talking about how to grow your best tomatoes, all the tips and tricks that I've learned over the years growing tomatoes, so that you guys can apply it to your gardens at home and grow the best tomatoes possible. So without further ado, let's just hop right into the video. Okay, so there are two types of tomatoes that you will hear talked about in the tomato world. Those two tomatoes are determinate tomatoes and indeterminate tomatoes. So determinate tomatoes are basically tomatoes where they have a determined height, so they're going to grow to a determined height and they're going to produce a determined amount of fruit. Indeterminate tomatoes are tomatoes that have no determined anything. So they can grow as tall, they can grow super duper tall and produce a lot of fruit, and it's not determined. Which brings me to my next point, where there's actually two common size of tomatoes that you will hear a lot, and it's not limited to just these two tomatoes, but these are the two most common, and the two that I grow, which are slicer tomatoes, which are the tomatoes that you eat on like tomato sandwiches and BLTs, things like that. And then you have your cherry tomatoes, which are your small, tiny tomatoes that you throw on salads and things like that. Okay, so the next thing to know about tomatoes that is really important is trellising. Especially with indeterminate tomatoes, you're going to need a good trellising system. I use cattle panels, which I really love because they're super duper sturdy and they last for a really long time. So it's really nice, and it's really easy to attach and tie the tomatoes to the trellis, which I absolutely love. As I mentioned, indeterminate tomatoes are going to grow super tall. So I put my cattle panels about 2 feet off the ground so that it can make the cattle panel even taller, because the tomatoes don't really need any support till they're about 2 feet tall. So in addition to trellising, the other thing that is super duper important when growing tomatoes is spacing. Spacing is one of the most important things because if you have correct spacing, it allows good airflow, which also prevents disease, and that's super important. So I personally plant my tomatoes 18 inches apart. It allows for airflow, and it allows the tomatoes not to be too crowded, and so it allows for every tomato plant to get enough nutrients that it needs. It's not crowding, it's not reaching for light, they're not competing for resources. So to my next point is pruning. Pruning allows airflow, and I actually prune my plants to a single stem. And the reason I do that, again, is for airflow, because airflow is so important when it comes to preventing disease and having really healthy plants. So I prune mine down to 1 or 2 liters, which works really well for me. So the way I prune them down to 1 or 2 liters is by pruning all the suckers. And by pruning all the suckers, it allows airflow and makes it easier to attach to the trellis. A sucker is the little shoot that grows out of the main stem and the armpit of the tomato plant. So every time that I see a sucker, I will clip that off, and so that allows just the branches. And then I also prune any of the bottom leaves. So I prune the bottom leaves, and usually I'll just prune any leaves that are touching the ground because I don't want any leaves touching the ground. That being said, usually the bottom leaves of a tomato plant are going to be sicker. So if you see the bottom leaves a little sickly, don't worry, because it's totally normal. Usually the bottom leaves are going to be a little sick, so it's okay if they look like that. But any leaves on the bottom that are looking a little sickly, you can just clip off, or if they're touching the ground, I like to clip those off too, just to kind of prevent the disease. Okay, so one of the things that's really important to remember when thinking about trellising and pruning and all those things is that how we grow our tomato plants is not how they naturally grow. So how we trellis them up and grow them vertically, that is not how they naturally grow. If you actually let a tomato plant go, it actually naturally would grow on the ground, because all the little root hairs on the stem, they all will create new roots. But the problem with that method, or allowing them to grow that way, is that it allows a lot more disease. So by growing them vertically, it reduces the chance of disease, and again allows more airflow and makes it an overall healthier plant. So that's one of the reasons that we grow vertically, is so that we can have an overall healthier plant and for it to last longer. Okay, so in addition to pruning and trellising, the other thing that is super important, especially with tomatoes, is watering consistently. So watering is so important because it affects so many things with tomatoes. It can affect their flavor. It can affect how they produce tomatoes and things like that. So I can't stress to you enough how important it is to water your plants consistently so that they can kind of grow consistently, if that makes any sense. So the rule of thumb I kind of go by when it comes to watering is I try to water like every couple of days, and instead of watering every day shallowly, like a shallow water every single day, I like to do a deep water every other day. And I do this just because it allows the roots, when you deeply water, to stretch further for water, and it just makes it a lot more of a healthier plant because it has a lot deeper roots. But there's exceptions to that. So like, for example, if you're going a long time without any rain, then you're probably gonna have to start watering every single day. But even then, deeply water, because it's a lot better for the plants. So if it takes you a little longer, that's okay. It's worth it. But if you get a lot of rain, don't water on those days, because it's already gotten the rain for the day and it doesn't need to be watered again, because then you're gonna overwater. Okay, so we've talked about watering, we've talked about trellising, we've talked about pruning, we've talked about all the different things. But now what I want to mention to you is some common problems, because I'm gonna be honest, tomato growing is not just a walk in the park. It has its difficulties, and yes, it can be very frustrating sometimes. Okay, so there's a couple common issues that I want to mention to you that maybe you're facing or you're going to face, so that you're prepared to take on those problems whenever they occur. So the first thing is blight. Blight is probably one of the most common tomato issues that occur. It usually happens on the bottom leaves of your tomato plant, and it's just like this yellowing on your tomato plant, and it definitely can take out tomato plants if not treated. Usually what I do whenever I see blight is I just remove the areas affected. Sometimes if you let it go and it kind of spreads through your whole plant, usually that'll happen kind of later in the season. Then I will just rip it out if it's kind of later in the season and I've gotten what I got from it, or what I needed from it. That's kind of how I deal with blight. The next issue is aphids. Not only do they happen with tomato plants, but they happen with lots of different plants, but especially with tomatoes you will get aphids. And aphids are just tiny black bugs or green, they kind of vary in color, that will appear on the underside of your leaves, and those are another things that can be an absolute issue. How I deal with it is I spray neem oil on it. It's an organic pest control method, and I like it. I've found it works pretty well. The other thing that I've heard about is using ladybugs, because ladybugs like eating aphids. But the thing is that if you have a small garden and don't really have a population of aphids, you know, for the ladybugs to eat on, they're gonna kind of tend to go to another place where they have more food. So it would go more for the bigger gardens that I would put I would release ladybugs, because if you have a smaller garden and there's nothing there for them, then they might just leave and you would be back in square one. The next issue is tomato hornworms, a very common issue that I have had in the past, but I have actually been able to get rid of them before they really did any damage, but they can definitely take out a plant in a day or two. So definitely, if you have tomato hornworms, get on that issue right away. I know if you have a bigger garden, I've never done this, but I've heard some people do, is they use black lights. At night they go out with a black light and the hornworms will glow under the black light, and you can find any hornworms that way. Then the next issue I wanted to mention is leaf curl. Now, I've mentioned that I have had a herbicide issue. You know that you have an herbicide issue whenever the new growth is curling up and shriveling. That is a sign of herbicide damage. But one of the more common issues is if one of your tomato plants is super stressed out, all the leaves will curl. And that's how you know that it's stressed out. There's multiple things you can do. It might be just a case of needing it to be watered. That's one of the main reasons that they're curling, is just because they're stressed. It's just showing a sign of stress. So don't freak out if you have your tomato leaves curling. You probably just need to give it a little bit of water. Okay, so that is all that I have for you guys today. I hope that you guys enjoyed and learned something new. Hopefully this will help you in your tomato growing. And I hope you guys enjoyed. Make sure you guys comment, subscribe, like, all those good things, and I'll see you next time. Bye!